I'm going to begin with a shameless book plug. So, as Jesse mentioned, my wife and I run the blog Root Simple. We're also the authors of The Urban Homestead and Making It, both of which have chapters on beekeeping. However, the second book, Making It, has the particular type of beekeeping, which I'm going to talk about today, which is sometimes called backwards beekeeping or natural beekeeping. Oops, hold on here. All right, so as Jesse mentioned, this is our blog, rootsimple.com, and there's quite a few posts on beekeeping. If you go to the search, you'll find all those posts. So I thought I'd begin with a very brief sketch of bee biology. Now, disclaimer, I am not an entomologist, and this organism, honeybees, which we're going to talk about today, is enormously complex, and we could spend 10 weeks just on the biology alone, but I'm just going to do a cursory review of this really, truly remarkable and mysterious organism. Now I'm going to begin with two other inhabitants of our household. That's our cat Trout and our Saluki Ivan. Now, the natural beekeeper Mikhail Teal likes to talk about how we as human beings are used to dealing with animals that have faces. So we know the expressions of dogs and the expressions of cats. Bees, on the other hand, are altogether much more mysterious and alien to us. They are very, very different kind of organism. And yet they are also sentient, thinking being that knows our presence when we're around them, and to which we have interacted as human beings now for many thousands of years. I think if there's one takeaway today about bee biology that you should have is that honeybees are a superorganism. So it's good to consider each individual hive as one entity, not as 40,000 individual entities. So a superorganism like honeybees, like certain kinds of termites and ants, are made up of individuals that do different roles, but together it really is one thing, you know. So we interact with like one cat, one dog, but also as a beehive as a whole, it is one thing, not 40,000 individuals. And that I think is an important thing to realize when you're working with them or seeing them just in their daily chores, right? So we're going to be talking today mostly about honeybees or Apis mellifera. But it's important to note that honeybees are by no means the only kind of bee. In California alone, there are 1,600 species of native bees. In the United States, I think the number is something like 4,000 species of native bees. And I'm going to talk some more about native bees later in the talk and how you can encourage them in your garden. But I think most people are here to talk about honeybees specifically. Now, as I said, it's a superorganism, and each individual hive, the mysterious thing for me about them is that the hive has an awareness of the landscape around it. Some of you may know about the waggle dance that bees do in the hive, wherein one foraging bee will tell the other bees where they can get nectar or pollen. And they do this little wiggle dance. And one of the amazing things when you keep bees is, and you're looking at a hive, is you can see this taking place, which is like seeing the thinking of the entity itself. It's like peering into its thought process. And this, again, this awareness that the hive has extends to all the resources that could be many square miles around the hive, because these workers can go up to maybe 9 miles away from the hive, most commonly closer, but they can go very far. And I think in terms of understanding this organism too, I find it ironic that all the depictions of this waggle dance, this like the graphic you're looking at, are often like from above, from our perspective. But think about it from the bee's perspective, looking at this other bee moving around, saying like, go this way a certain distance, make a left turn, make a right turn, and you'll find these flowers. So I think, again, I think when we deal with bees, we need to acknowledge that they are a very different organism from us. That kind of interaction will help when you actually come to working with the bees themselves, which we'll talk about in a bit. Hold on a second. All right. So honeybees have evolved to have a symbiotic relationship with plants. It's important to note that honeybees are not native to the United States, to the New World. They came here via the Spanish and the Portuguese, who brought them on ships. But they have evolved to have a relationship with plants. In this case, we planted some poppies in our yard one year. Poppies are from where bees are from. And so it's kind of, if you've ever grown poppies, you'll know that they'll have like 20 honeybees on them at a time. And obviously the plants have evolved along with the bees into a symbiotic relationship. So I'm going to go into what is in the hive, what that superorganism is made up of, and it's made up of workers, queens, and drones. So the worker bee, all female, have a different set of chores throughout their life, and this is an oversimplification, but after they hatch, they do some period of cell cleaning, cleaning up the hive. Bees are very, very interested in keeping the inside of the hive clean and expelling any foreign insects or rats or anything like that. A certain period of time, they take care of the young bees. They produce wax, so they make comb. And then the last part of their life, they forage until they drop dead. Gathering nectar and pollen and propolis. So we'll talk about those things in a bit. But so that's the worker bee. Drones are the male bees. They're very easy to spot. They have these giant buggy eyes, right, that are very different than the worker bees or the queen. So it's just this giant eye. Basically, their only role is, or their main role is, to mate with a queen. So they carry the genetics, half of the genetics of a hive, essentially. They do not have a stinger. So if you're a beekeeper, there's a little trick that you can do is put drones on your hand and show them to people, because they don't sting. They also have somewhat of a sacrificial role in that they tend to be on the outer edges of the comb. And so when there are things like mites and other parasites that get into the hive, they're kind of a sink for that. So those are kind of the roles of the drone. By the way, the drone, after the drone mates with the queen, it dies, by the way. So funny part of their role. The queen is long and narrow. There's usually, but not always, only one queen in a hive. Their main role is laying thousands of eggs a day. They also produce a pheromone, a smell that the bees fan out, which is like a recognition symbol for each hive. It's the way the workers kind of know which hive to go into. And it's one of the markers of the hive itself, and it's distinctive from hive to hive. Any egg that's laid by a queen can be made into a queen, and the workers do that by feeding the larvae something called royal jelly. And they make these, you can see at the bottom of this frame, there are these sort of large little oval shaped things, and those are queen cells. So those are eggs that have been fed royal jelly and are being made into queens. And this is, of course, how the hive reproduces. So they make a new queen, And then the old queen flies off with half of the workers in what's called a swarm. And we'll talk more about swarms later on. Some of you may have seen them. It's quite an amazing sight. Swarms typically land on trees, but this is one that landed on a bicycle. I was trying to find in my slides, but I couldn't earlier, one that landed on a bumper of a car that someone actually drove to a fellow beekeeper's house to have removed on the freeway, which was crazy. But anyways, that's swarms. That's the inside of a queen cell. So the queen larvae, again, being fed the royal jelly. Then it hatches and it has to mate with a drone. So it flies off for mating flights multiple times, mates with multiple drones, stores up semen in a sac, and then the eggs subsequently laid then are the product of that queen and then multiple drones. So all the workers are essentially half sisters, so they're genetically diverse within a hive. One of the kind of amazing things I think about queen mating is that the queens will fly off to particular drone congregation areas. Now, these drone congregation areas are static and last for many, many years. They're about 200 feet off the ground in specific locations. And the queens fly in a grid pattern, again, very alien organism, very strange, fly to these very particular drone congregation areas. This is a map of them. This is the queen doing what she does, which is lay eggs. Those tiny little oval-shaped things are eggs laid in comb. Those become larvae once they hatch. The new worker bees do something called an orientation flight. Many new beekeepers see this. So this happens like typically in the afternoon or midday. Thousands of the new hatched worker bees fly out from the hive in an oval kind of pattern. So someone here is actually in the lower left, you can see they've mapped where these orientation flights go. And essentially what these worker bees are doing is fixing the location of their hive and beginning to understand the landscape around it so that they can go forage later on in their lives and know where to go back to the hive. Of course, honey, one of the products many of you are probably here for. Bees gather nectar. They ingest it, and some of the enzymes in their bodies help break down the nectar a bit, and then they regurgitate it into cells. So on the right, you can see this like freshly regurgitated nectar, which then the bees fan to dehydrate. So it has to be processed, essentially dehydrated. And then on the left, they cap it. And so that capped honey on the left is what you would buy in the store, essentially. Bees also gather pollen. So that on the lower right, you can see, and what's amazing, of course, is the pollen comes from many different flowers. So you can see the different colors of the pollen. And the pollen and the honey are their food resources, which they, of course, store up in large quantities because they're smart, unlike us, and know to have more than they need to survive through a drought or cold weather or a lack of flowers. So those are the two main products of the hive, but also they gather sap from trees and wood and whatever, and they make propolis. And this is kind of like a building material, so they will use it to cover up any crevice in the hive and to really stick things together. It has powerful antimicrobial qualities, so it also helps repel potential pests from the hive. So you'll see that whenever you open a hive box, this brown sticky substance called propolis. But another, I I'm very conservative about gathering honey. I won't gather it if there's a drought. I tend to respect the bees and know they need it as food, so I'm very conservative about gathering it. But I think the main benefit that I've seen from our hives over the years has been their pollination services. And so we have an avocado tree. I think we have many, many more avocados thanks to the bees, and our neighbors probably have many more avocados as well, thanks to those same bees. All right, so I'm gonna move into keeping bees, how one keeps bees. So this is my mentor, Kirk Anderson, who was one of the founders of a group called the Backwards Beekeepers. And Kirk taught a very radical form of natural beekeeping. Kirk is controversial, I'm controversial. Of all the topics that we've covered in our book, beekeeping has been one of the most controversial topics. Kirk was referred to as the Taliban beekeeper at one point by the Beekeeping Association. But I think over the 10 years that I've done this now, that the techniques that Kirk has shown me have proven useful, and they've worked. And in fact, conventional beekeepers have been secretly adopting some of these techniques. And but I'm open to other ideas on this, but of course I think that I'm right. How do I put that? Anyways, so I'm going to describe basic backwards beekeeping, what it is and how it's different than conventional beekeeping. This is Kirk showing, this is the first lesson I had with Kirk, in which he brought a shop vac that had filled full of bees to our house, and then proceeded to remove them from the shop vac. And you can actually, there's a video of this in YouTube that I linked in the resources that were sent out. You can watch Kirk remove the bees from this shop vac, and in the process showed me how to relocate bees. So here's Kirk cutting into the bottom of the shop vac, barehanded, which is Kirk, unafraid to get stung. And then this moment, which I'm so glad the video captured, was what got me hooked to beekeeping, because he opened the bottom of the shop vac and suddenly there was the hive itself, all the mystery of nature. It seemed like the veil had parted, and here was this amazing organism that has occupied my time and my dreams ever since that magical moment. Here's some of the equipment and tools that you need if you want to do this particular style of beekeeping. Now, we do use conventional Langstroth hives. Now, this is Mr. Langstroth, who was a kind of amateur scientist, I guess you would call him, who in the 19th century figured out how to house bees in what is essentially a file cabinet for bees. And what he figured out was the distance between these sort of movable frames in the hive, the ideal distance between them that would keep the bees building comb in an orderly fashion, and essentially in a container that they liked and would take to. Because again, the bees in nature, generally honeybees that is, will make their house typically in the cavity of a tree is the most common thing. But Mr. Langstroth figured out how to put them in a box that could be manipulated and honey harvested, etc., more conveniently. Because if they're in a tree, you have to climb the tree and go in there with a knife and essentially kill the bees to harvest the honey. But this was a way to have the bees live year after year, still be able to harvest honey, and still be able to keep an eye on them. And it is still what most beekeepers use to this day. I'll show you some other variations, but this is essentially it. And this is A Langstroth box, if you're interested in doing this yourself, this is called a migratory hive, just simply because it's the kind that large-scale beekeepers use because it can be forklifted. Um, but you can see in it are individual frames that the bees build their foundation on, build their comb on, and medium boxes and a top and a bottom board. It's pretty simple. We're lucky here in LA. There's a large bee box manufacturing company called LA Honey in East LA. And you can just go there and ask for the unassembled medium boxes, which is what we use in the backwards technique. You'll see it on the left. You have to assemble it yourself. And then you'll see on the right an assembled box, which I like to paint a light color, by the way, both to preserve the box and to keep the box cool in the summertime. So again, unassembled medium boxes at LA Honey is the kind of like backwards, basic backwards box. So there's different sizes of bee boxes. And the reason that we use medium boxes is because the deep boxes are super heavy. So this is one of the lessons that I learned, which was a surprise to me, is if you get thousands of bees in one of these boxes, they are very, very heavy. So the medium boxes are about 60 pounds. That deep box could be 100 pounds or more. So I find the medium boxes the most convenient to use. The other twist on natural beekeeping or backwards beekeeping is that we do not use pre-made foundations. So conventional beekeepers, you see on the right there, use a pre-printed either plastic or wax foundation. And we natural beekeepers believe that we should allow the bees to make their own foundation, because why would we dictate to them what type of foundation to use? And there's multiple reasons for that. First of all, if you put empty frames or these pre-printed frames in a beehive, you will find that they much prefer the open frames. They will take to those before they will take to the pre-printed frame. The other thing is, and we'll get into the particular type of bees that we have here in Southern California, but they are smaller than conventional bees. So they do not like the pre-printed stuff because the cells are too large. Again, I think as natural beekeepers, we like to let the bees do their thing because we assume that they know better than we human beings know what they need. So, so what we do is we buy the unassembled frames, assemble them, and then you can see there's kind of like a popsicle stick at the top of that frame that the bees are dangling from, and we'll stick those in there to give the bees kind of like a guide for building their comb. As I mentioned, there are other kinds of hives too, other than Langstroth hives. This is probably the other most common hive. It's called a top bar hive. It was developed by the Peace Corps in Africa, American Peace Corps in Africa back in the 60s or 70s. It has advantages and disadvantages. It was developed by the Peace Corps because it is inexpensive to build and it's easier to build for an amateur carpenter, essentially. The other advantage I should say about it is that if you have a bad back or are disabled, it is much easier to deal with because you don't have the heavy boxes to lift around. It's essentially just one long file cabinet. The disadvantage is that you have to intervene more often because the bees will run out of space, and you can't just add boxes as easily as you can with the Langstroth. So it has some disadvantages too. It has many fervent adherents. I'm sort of agnostic on whether you use one or the other. I think you do whatever you want to do. You can see in the background, someone's even turned a log into a hive. So there's many other different sort of hive technologies out there. I just stick with the Langstroth because it's available at LA Honey cheaply and easily, and I can just drop down there and get boxes for, I think, I can't remember, it's like $20 a box or something like that. If I had $1 for every ridiculous gadget that someone has sent me in the past few years on Kickstarter, I would be a wealthy man. I would, you know, go for the Langstroth, go for the top bar, but please avoid these things. These are just plainly ridiculous, and people trying to make money, like this Flow Hive, which was a Kickstarter project that raised some obscene amount of money, like millions and millions of dollars. One of those costs $1,000 a piece, whereas I think you can get out of LA Honey with those medium boxes, as many, you know, several boxes and some of the equipment probably for less than $200. So just avoid this stuff, please. I'm so tired of getting those Kickstarter announcements. The other thing about backward style of beekeeping is that conventional beekeepers treat their bees with lots of chemicals, because over the past few decades, there have been many parasites that have plagued conventional beekeepers, like the mites that you see on the top left. And then lately, just in the past few years, the small hive beetle. Our philosophy as backwards beekeepers is that we allow the bees to sort it out. Eventually, thanks to the laws of Darwin, they will figure out how to deal with mites and deal with small hive beetles. The bees that I keep are, well, I'll get into it in a bit, but they're feral. They're local bees. They've been living without treatment for, well, since this, you know, dozens, hundreds of years, whatever. And so they have evolved to dealing with mites, small hive beetles, whatever is thrown at them without treatment. The treatments are extraordinarily complicated. If you go to a conventional beekeeping convention, as I did, they will spend most of their time talking about all of the treatments that you see on the right and cycling through them. And I think that they are simply propping up weak bees. And I am interested in keeping bees that can naturally deal with parasites. As I mentioned, I keep the local feral bees. This is another point of controversy with backwards beekeeping because of the issue of Africanized bees. So let's talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I'll get into various ways that you can capture local bees for free. In the center is swarms. On the right is taking bees out of walls, and on the left is just setting up a box and letting them move in on their own. But let's talk about the local bees. So back in the 1950s, a scientist in Brazil brought bees from Africa to Brazil because European honeybees do not do well in tropical places. So his idea was to bring a subspecies. Again, we're talking about Apis mellifera here, not some other kind of bee, but just a subspecies of Apis mellifera. He brought them to Brazil, and somehow they got out. Bees, now the bees in Africa are hunted rather than kept, so they naturally tend to be a little bit more defensive, like quite a bit more defensive. So they got out. And they made their way, as you can see from the map on the left, to the United States by the 1990s. Now, as they came north, they interbred with the European bees that have been here since the Spanish and the bees that people keep, and I would contend became less aggressive, more docile, not by any means as docile as European bees. But then there's the issue of what to call them, because they're known as Africanized bees. However, it's sort of I consider an oddly sort of racist term, because you could just as easily call them Europeanized bees or feral bees or the local bees. Because again, they've interbred with the bees that were here, and they have naturalized to the environment and to the climate as they've gone north. So I just like to call them feral bees or local bees. They are resistant to disease. They are adapted to the local climate. So they're adapted to living in a hot climate. So if we go back to that map, there's kind of a northern limit on them, the map on the right. They don't do well in cold weather. So these bees are the local bees. They are free. They are not killers. They tend to be they will know you're there when you open the hive box. Let me put it that way. And I work in a bee suit. I don't like work in short sleeves. However, they are not like some kind of horror movie situation. And lastly, I'd contend they're here, so we have to work with them anyways. And they have significant genetic advantages. As backwards beekeepers, we caught a lot of heat from the local beekeeping association, which insists on everyone buying bees from north of the Africanized line. However, I have heard recently that they've secretly begun keeping the local bees themselves. They just don't like to talk about it because they know that they have significant genetic advantages. They're resistant to mites, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I think we should call them local bees or feral bees, not Africanized bees, because it's just, you know, it's one of these issues where cultural ideas are imposed where there is no genetic basis for this anyways. They are, again, they are like my cat that I showed you earlier that came from, you know, 2 blocks over. What is that cat? It's just a local cat, right? It's not a, you know, that's all it is. Same thing with the bees. That's why I don't think it's a good idea to buy bee packages. You can see the price there, $135 to $140. These are bees from, again, when you buy bees, they're from some more northerly place, at least Northern California or the Northeast somewhere. They're not adapted to our climate. There's at least a 50-50 chance that it's going to fail. And so that's a lot of money. So I'd rather just go get some free bees, which is relatively easy to do. And I'm going to show how that's done in a moment. But yeah, but the only cool thing about this is that these are actually sent through the mail, which is it's amazing to think about. So some of the equipment you'll need, this is the type of bee suit that I like. So the local bees, I said, are not killer bees, but they are a little more, they'll let you know they don't like you poking around with them sometimes. So I like to wear a full suit like this with boots. One thing about this that I learned the hard way is you have to learn how to use this suit, and it's very simple. Just make sure it's zipped up. You don't want them inside the veil. That is not fun. But yeah, these are available. Date & Supply and a few other places make these. We can, if some of you want to get into the weeds on bee suits, we can talk about that in the Q&A. This is a smoker. I love that the smoker design is unchanged since the late 19th century. If you look at designs for smokers in old catalogs, it's exactly the same. It's reached its final design phase. So what the smoke does is it calms the bees down by interfering with their alarm pheromone, which is a pheromone that they set out when they feel like they're being attacked by a human or a bear or something. And the smoke kind of covers that. But it also makes them think that there's a forest fire, so they go eat the honey or they go gorge on the honey, and it keeps them busy while you work with them. So when I'm removing bees from a wall or something, or when I'm looking at a box, you smoke them first. You cannot smoke out bees, by the way. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the smoke is just used to calm bees when you're working with them. In terms of bee placement, this is our house, and the arrow is pointing to the back of our yard next to a shed. I'll show you in a moment that I built a little fence around, and that's where I keep my bees. Everyone's situation is different, but generally you don't want to put the bees on your patio where you're hanging out. You don't want the bees crossing a path. You want them in a kind of out of the way place. And most people's, if you have a yard, there's usually somewhere where they can go. And I always think that in a garden, there should be a space where you don't go so much anyways, and that's where the bees go. So this is our shed in the backyard, and then I built a little fence around the bees, mainly to keep the dog out of there, because dogs can be kind of stupid with bees sometimes. Although our dogs learn not to eat bees, or spicy flies as we call them. But the other thing the fence does around there is it forces the bees up. So they come out of their box and they fly up, which they tend to do naturally, but this sort of forces that. They tend to just go up about 30 feet and take off. It's not like they hang out and I mean, they do pollinate stuff in the yard, of course, but it's not like they just hang out there. But a fence around it is not mandatory, but kind of nice to have. On the left is my friend Max Wong, and neighbor, another beekeeper, and she keeps bees on the roof of a restaurant in downtown LA, Redbird restaurant. And so I got to go there once with her. It was fun. So you don't just have to have a yard. You can keep bees on a roof, especially a flat roof is cool. And so she raises bees for honey for the restaurant in downtown LA. So if you're interested in getting into beekeeping, what I tell people is that you should get your suit, get your boxes, and set them up and have them ready. Because inevitably, especially this time of year is when the swarms start. But Southern California is a place where the weather's so nice that there's swarms all year round here, unlike, places where it gets cold. So there's usually bees year round available. These are our bees again by the shed, but set up the boxes. There's actually a 1 in 10 chance that the bees will move in on their own because they just like a dark box. And I've had that happen. The other detail I'll point out here, again, these are all medium boxes from LA Honey, is there's a metal stand at the bottom to raise the bees up a little bit in case you have to move them or work with them. It's nice to have them up a little bit, but also to kind of keep them off the ground so they don't get wet. You want to use either a metal stand or cinder blocks. I used to use a wooden stand and then it fell over and that was not fun. So some kind of metal stand and then a bunch of medium boxes. And then as the hive grows, I add more boxes essentially. And those particular hives have been there for years now. I think one came from a squirrel box and the other came from a tree in the neighborhood, and they've been very productive and healthy and happy. As I mentioned earlier, honeybees are not the only bees. So I hope that many of you will go keep bees, but a lot of you probably won't. But you can do a lot for native pollinators. If you're interested in helping native pollinators, bees, butterflies, bumblebees, again, thousands of different species, this is a really great book. The Xerxes Society also has a website with a lot of information on it, but this book goes into, all the different kinds of bees and what you can do to encourage them. And the two simplest things are, if you have a garden, plant native plants that are adapted to our climate and that help native pollinators. And then don't keep a overly clean garden. So, for instance, many bumblebees will build their nests in the ground. And so some areas of open ground in a garden are good. There's many other nesting bees that also like open ground. Pieces of wood, etc. So again, native plants and not a monoculture of grass and hedges, like some biodiversity. It really, I got on my soapbox, it bothers me that there's this trend of decomposed granite and agave plants, this sort of low maintenance garden that doesn't have flowering plants in it. There's no reason that we need to think that we're in a desert. We're not yet, at least. We're in a Mediterranean climate. We can have things that flower and look lush and help the native pollinators. You can also drill holes in pieces of wood. So I did this in an experiment a few years ago. I just drilled a bunch of holes of different sizes, I think somewhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch. not expecting to see anything. And immediately this particular native bee, which I think is some kind of sweat bee, if someone knows, you can leave a comment in the chat, moved in immediately. And I actually got to see them emerge from the wood just coincidentally, which was a wonderful thing. Now, these are not, a lot of these native bees, they're not superorganisms like honeybees. They don't have like thousands and thousands of individuals in them. They are more solitary. There's like several bees in each of those holes, not by any means thousands. They won't sting you, and they're a great pollinator and great resource for us in our environment. All right, so let's say, so this is the time of year when, if you're a beekeeper, you will start to get calls from friends, family, and neighbors. I don't know how people find me, but they call and they're like, help, I've got bees. So I'm going to go through, this is both how to get free bees, but also what to do if you have bees where you don't want them. All right, so I talked earlier about swarms. Swarms are how beehives reproduce. And they are the easiest kind of bee, free bee situation to deal with. So they will typically land on a branch or something like that. No, they're only on the branch temporarily, and they're sending out scouts to look for other locations to find a permanent home, essentially. And when they're swarming, they tend to be pretty docile because they don't have resources to protect. So you can usually go up to them and look at them when they're swarming. However, sometimes they get a little cranky if they've been too long on the branch and haven't found a permanent place to live. So this is a swarm. Another thing I'd say about the swarm that I find like truly beautiful and miraculous is that you can see the scout bees who are looking for the permanent home doing their waggle dance in the cluster. So you can see, again, this living thing thinking, and that to me is one of the amazing and miraculous things that you get to see as a beekeeper. But to capture a swarm is super simple. You basically just spray that mass with some sugar water, and that keeps the bees busy cleaning themselves. And then you knock them into a box, and you take the box away, and that's it. These were some bees that landed on my neighbor's orange tree. And that is the easiest kind of swarm, the easiest kind of bee situation to deal with, unless they're 60 feet up in a tree, in which case, you know, I tell people when there's a swarm, actually, you can just let them take off. They will generally take off in a few days. Occasionally, they will stay there and form a colony. Those colonies tend not to last so long. Swarms, again, will take place again at this time of year, typically, is when they begin, when colonies begin reproducing. Again, you can just wait for them to fly away if they're way up and not easy to access. If they're down on a low branch, they're easy to grab. I also remove bees from walls. This is somewhat harder. To do this, if they, you know, again, a wall cavity is kind of an ideal space for bees because it's a dark cavity that's very much like a cavity in a tree, which is their native and a natural home. To remove bees from a wall, but I've also, you know, seen them in hot tub mechanics and electrical boxes, any kind of cavity. This is my friend John helping me. He's smoking the wall, so the smoking calms them down, and it allows us to, you have to open the wall up, and when you open the wall up, you see all of the comb and the bees on it. And then what we do is we cut that comb out, we tie it into frames, then put it in a box, stick the box by the wall where they were, and then I come back in the evening and take the box away. And this is what's called a cutout. It's a lot of work. It's messy. It takes hours to do. Sometimes I've removed some. This hive was pretty small and didn't take too long. I've seen some that have been on a wall for 10 years and they're 6 feet wide and it takes all day. So it's a lot of work. But this is, if you have bees in a wall, this is what you need to do. You need to hire a beekeeper and remove them. It's the best way to do it. If you hire an exterminator, they're going to kill the bees, first of all, and it's a living thing, and that kind of bothers me. But also, you're going to have all the honey and comb in there, which then the rats get into. So this is the ideal way to remove them from a wall. I do recommend after you remove the bees that you make sure they can't get back in, because once the bees come into a wall and you remove them, the scent of bees is in there and scout bees will find it again and move back in. So, you know, also it's good to make sure your house does not have holes and empty cavities in it. So that's something to think about. Or you can just let them be there. So that's the other thing. If they're not bothering anyone, I told people you can leave them there. There are actually houses in India where people deliberately let the bees move into a wall and keep them there. If they're up and high up and not bothering anyone, then who cares? They maintain the hive, they keep it clean. You're not going to have honey dripping. By no means should you try to plug it up or smoke them out or any of that kind of stuff. If you try to plug it up, the bees can come in, they will try to find another way out. That could be inside your house. You do not want to do that. So you need to either learn how to do this, and believe it or not, this is pretty simple. If you watch us do this, you will learn in a few hours how to remove bees from a wall. It's not rocket science, but don't let people who don't know how to do it. That's my editorial, one of my many editorials for today. Another situation you see is bees in a tree. This is pretty common, again, because this is a bee's natural home. These are much harder to get out. So I generally don't do them. If they're high up in a tree, I just tell people, just leave them there. They're fine. They're not bothering anyone. Just don't do anything about it. This particular case was a neighbor. The bees were in a tree very low to the ground. And so I did something called a trap out. So what you do is you screen off the beehive. You make this weird cone thing, which allows the bees to come out, but they can't figure out their way back in. You stick a box with what's called bird comb, which is baby bees in it. The bees from the tree can't get back into their home. They go into the box instead. They start turning one of the eggs in the brood comb into a queen, and they make a new queen. This process takes 3 weeks, and I have to monitor it at least every day or every other day. So it's a lot of work. So I don't do this too often, but this is the proper way to remove bees from a tree, other than simply chainsawing them out, which is the other way, which I've never done, and obviously not so easy to do. If you have bees in a tree like this, the other thing I should say is you should call an arborist, because there's a cavity in your tree, and that can either be not something to be worried about, but it can also be something to be worried about. You might have a tree that's about to fall over, so it's something to think about. Beware of bee removal scams. In the research I did for our blog, I discovered a Google bee removal scam that is very similar to a locksmith scam that some of you may have heard about a few years ago. But essentially, you have bees in your house, you panic, you search Google for bee removal, and there are various scammy people who put up ads on Google. They come, they ask for an obscene amount of money. You're panicked, so you pay them. They remove the bees, but then they kill them. So you want it to find a reputable beekeeper. In the materials that I gave you, I have a phone number for someone that I know is reputable, who does live removals and he has a bee yard where they go. I can only do a certain number of bee removals a year. I have a friend who runs a farm, but there's only so much space there, so I can only do like 4 or 5, and then I run out of places to take them. And then I only keep 2 hives at my home. So just watch out for those bee removal places. Now these are wasps. So a good portion of the calls I get are for people who say they have bees, and then I show up and they're paper wasps. This is a very common wasp here. They are a beneficial insect. They are also pollinators, but they also eat other, they're carnivorous, so they eat other insects. So these are a good thing. This is a colony of paper wasps that was right over a seat that I sit on on our front porch. I lived with these paper wasps for an entire summer, reading books in a chair underneath them. They never once bothered me. They tend not to bother you if you don't bother them. And again, they are beneficial insects. So I tell people, don't worry about the paper wasps. They're a good thing. So we need more paper wasps, not less paper wasps. You cannot remove this, by the way. If you remove it, you'll kill them. So that's just the way it is. All right. Pretty soon we'll take some questions. If you are interested in beekeeping, these are the two books that I recommend. So believe it or not, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Beekeeping is written by two of the most prominent natural beekeepers in America. Do not buy the Idiot's book, buy the, do not buy the, Dummy's book. The Idiot's book is the one you want. It's very good and covers a lot of the same sort of natural beekeeping techniques that I breezily went through. And then on the right is Save the Bees by two formerly local beekeepers who are the founders of honeylove.org. And this is also an excellent natural beekeeping book as well. Speaking of Honeylove, honeylove.org is a local organization that if you're interested in learning more about beekeeping, you should definitely join up with. They have monthly visits to their bee hives that you can go to and see what's involved and learn about how to keep bees, essentially. So you can find a mentor through them, and that's what I highly recommend if you want to do this. And it's honeylove.org, and again, it's in your resources as well. Now they're doing Zoom call hive inspections right now, so you can watch that from the comfort of your home. But once we can all gather again, you can go and see the bees in person. All right, and so this is a beekeeper in Brazil who has a beekeeping donkey, and with that, I will stop screen sharing and take any questions that you might have about keeping bees or bee biology or whatever else you're interested in.
Well, I don't see any questions in our chat. Does anyone have a question for Eric? Can put it in the chat.
Did I cover everything perfectly?
I think you did. It was a great presentation. Right. Oh, now we have a couple that just popped up. We have Barry asking, attracting honeybees versus other kinds of bees.
Oh, attracting honeybees to your garden. Well, so whatever, I mean, you know, this is actually a point of contention because the native bees are actually being crowded out by European honeybees, Apis mellifera. So basically, whatever you plant, they will go for, and they are a formidable organism. I mean, they are highly adaptable to all kinds of places in the world, and so they will, you know, some would contend that they are out competing some of the native insects. So I would say focus on, if you want to attract native insects, focus on planting native plants. So go to Theodore Payne, go to Nativa Nursery, these sorts of places, and those plants will tend to support native pollinators. Honeybees will also visit them too. So it's kind of hard to have one and not the other. But yeah, definitely plant things that create flowers, I would say, is vitally important. Not just agaves and ivy plant and grass. Like, let's make a diverse environment.
Our next question is from Stacy. Are there any books you definitely do not recommend?
Well, because I'm part of the Taliban contingent of beekeeping, I would highly recommend those two books that I put up. You You know, the thing is, a lot of beekeeping books are written for places where they have winter. So this is one of the things. It's almost as if someone needs to write a book for Mediterranean climate beekeeping, because there are some things that are different about it. That's why I think it's particularly important here that you get sort of a hands-on mentoring, go to Honey Love, learn from someone, follow them around. Oh yes, thank you. Someone's holding up The Practical Beekeeper. That is an excellent book by Michael Bush. I should have put that on there. Yeah, oh, there's someone's The Backyard Beekeeper. That's another good one. Right on. Thank you for that. So yeah, Michael Bush's website is excellent. That book is basically a compendium of his blog posts. And so you can get the book for free on his website essentially, or get the book. Some people are holding up other books that I do not know. I'm sure you should have a beekeeping book club at the library, maybe. By the way, I so miss the library in the pandemic. Very, very much miss going to the library and thumbing through books. So there's some other books out there. I don't know about them. Again, the various practices I'm kind of behind. So there are other books that will suggest things like requeening, where you go and you kill the queen once a year. I think that's a very bad idea. I think comb's a very bad idea. I recognize that a lot of what I suggested isn't necessarily supported by peer-reviewed evidence yet. So, you know, that research hasn't been done, I don't think. I think it's largely because most beekeeping in this country is basically for pollinating almonds. If you go to a conventional beekeeping convention, that is primarily what they talk about, is pollinating mostly almonds here in California. And so I think we're asking a different question when we ask, how do you keep bees in a Mediterranean climate in a backyard? That is a different question than how do I keep thousands of bees and move them around the country and feed them high fructose corn syrup and all the terrible things that conventional beekeepers do. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. Are there any more questions?
There actually are. Daniel is asking, you say that you are conservative on harvesting honey. How often do you harvest and how much?
Well, I am lazy and stupid when it comes to harvesting honey. So I often will skip, I get busy with other stuff and I forget about it and I don't do it. You know, basically I asked myself, are we in a terrible drought? Which kind of the answer this year is sort of yes, right? So they need those resources to jump over the summer when the flowers stop blooming. So I will, if I do take honey, it's often like around this time of year. And I'm super conservative about it. I'll just take a frame, right? A little bit. I could probably get away with taking more. If it were a business for me, I probably would, but it's not. I think that the pollination services for me are the most important, like all the avocados that we have. And, you know, generally, like Kirk likes to talk about how if you focus on honey, you won't get honey. You focus on the health of the bees, it's just like a nice kind of side product that happens periodically. And that's kind of the way I think about it.
You. And next question is from Teresa. I live further north in Seattle. What is the swarming season for me? What would be a good size Langstroth hive box for me to consider?
Yeah, so I have no idea what swarming season is up there. I imagine it's sometime after it stops being cold, when things start blooming is my guess. It's right here now is when we do it. Now the second question was what kind of Langstroth hive, what size was it that you need?
Yes.
Yeah, so again, like I like the medium boxes because they're not as heavy. But you know, sometimes people inherit boxes, so I'd say use whatever you've got. The other thing I would say is that I like to have all medium boxes so that the equipment is interchangeable. So if I have to remove a box and put another box in, it's always a medium box. I don't have to oh, I don't have a medium box. I have this deep box. And it just makes it a lot simpler to start out with all medium boxes. And, do it that way. Now, I am a LA beekeeper. I don't know the conditions in Seattle. I mean, there are times when you overwinter hives and insulate them and all that kind of stuff. I have no idea how to do that. I have no experience with that. So that would, I would say seek out the natural beekeepers in your area for that sort of information, like when swarm season happens and what are the peculiarities of keeping bees in that climate. It's just like gardening. You have to be familiar with the local conditions. And that's my problem with the books, is that the books are, trying to cover the whole country or the whole world and are not focused on specific places where the conditions are different.
And I'm going to go a little out of order with some of the questions just because there's a couple here that are box related. Brianna asks, how often do you check the boxes?
Good question. I want to step back for a second, though. The last question, say Michael Bush is in a cold climate, so he has a lot of good information on keeping bees in places that are not like here. All right. How often do I check the boxes? All right. This is another thing that's super controversial, where we in the backwards movement were called hippies at one point, and what was the other one? Bee havers, that's the other one. I do not dig through the hive looking for the queen. Like, why would I do that? The only thing that I do is make sure that they have room. So if they're running out of room, I'll add a box. And so I should check them more often than I do. But, once a month, once every few months, pop the top off. If the top box has 8 out of 10 frames that are full, I'll stick another box on. And that's basically all I do.
And I believe these questions are similar. Barry and Thu are asking, Barry's asking, are there disadvantages to the shallow box compared to the medium if you'd rather have a lighter one? And Thu is asking, you didn't mention the shorter box. Is it bad?
Yeah, so I've thought about this lately a lot, because I think the deeper boxes are maybe better for the bees, because I think they naturally want to make a slightly bigger comb than the medium box. So I've thought about it, maybe I should do all deep boxes at some point. And I kind of wish that I can only keep 2 hives responsibly here, and pretty in tight quarters with the neighbors. If I had a bee yard or something, or a large expanse, I would probably keep, I would keep different boxes and see which works out the best. So, occasionally, one thing is like, if I'm doing a cutout and I have to remove them, I move the boxes. Again, there's that interchangeability issue. And then there is the weight. Like, the weight of a full deep box is like unbelievable. You really need 2 people to move it. You can throw your back out real easy with those. Now, the smaller box, I've never used it. I think those are too small. I don't think I would use those. Yeah, I go for the medium ones.
Thank you. Margaret had a question about what are the best flowers or plants for my garden to attract bees?
I'm sorry. What was the question? You broke up.
What are the best flowers or plants for my garden to attract bees?
Yeah, UC Davis did a study, and they actually found coyote bush was the plant that attracted the largest amount of not just bees but other insects as well, and that's one that we have in our garden. But like, you just go to Theodore Payne and you'll find, there's the nursery, by the way, you'll find, like, you can pretty much go with anything there, and it will be beneficial to some insect or another. And we have a lot of fruit trees in our, we have a fig and an olive and several other plants and trees, and they also, actually not the fig, but pomegranate tree, if you have stone fruit, those will attract bees as well and are very pretty. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Next question is from Monica. Can you recommend any mentors who can help me with backyard beekeeping in Pasadena? I tried beekeeping for about a year, but I lost 2 colonies. They swarmed and could use some local help.
That's a good question. Honeylove.org. I would say go to some of their meetings, email them, see if there's someone they know in your area. Kirk was great, but Kirk moved back to Utah, unfortunately. Not only was he a great teacher, he was hilarious and a lot of fun to hang out with. And I mean, the philosophy of backwards beekeeping that he had was just like quite amazing. On my blog, there's a podcast actually buried somewhere which is an interview with Kirk, which I should have put in the resources. But anyways, he's funny to listen to. But yeah, I'd say honeylove.org and reach out to them, send an email. There'll be someone, I'm sure, in Pasadena with some bees that can help you. Also, like, occasionally I do have to remove bees from somewhere, and I'm always like looking for somewhere to put them. So you can go to my website, rootsimple.com. You can send us an email. I kind of have an informal list of people who need bees. The only thing I ask for that is that you be set up to be ready to have the bees when I get a call. So everything has to be ready. I just dump them off. You got a box of bees.
Thank you. So I believe I got to everyone's question in the chat. Anyone else have a question before we wrap things up? Oh, yes, we do. Barry, does LA Honey have a website?
LA Honey is one of the things I love about them is they're sort of a pre-internet business. And very strange place when you go there. I think they have a Facebook page or something. If you Google LA Honey, you should find it. They have a weird warehouse. There we go. Someone just put the address in the chat. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's it. Fishburne Avenue.
Great. Well, Eric, thank you so much for your presentation today. It was incredibly informative. I think everyone else appreciated it as well. So thanks everybody for joining us today. And we hope to see you at the next Pasadena Grows program. And of course, check out rootsimple.com for more of what Eric does and more about beekeeping. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, everyone.